I hope I don't disappoint you. I listened to Geoffrey Roberts about the Catholic Church, and the one thing I thought about was a case in Florida that took place on 16 August 2009. And it's about a Muslim woman. Her name was Fatima Abdallah. The Florida police filed her case as a suicide. According to their investigation, she had knocked her head about 6 or 7 times on a coffee table. She had 4 broken ribs. Her blood was spattered, not only in the space where she knocked herself out, but all the way downstairs. The case is closed as a suicide. And listening to Mr. Robertson, I thought I would appeal to him to help us reopen that case. And if he does not, and if he cannot, then to show us, tell us, other lawyers who may. The fact that this case is dismissed and closed as a suicide is not only a shame on, I think, all civilized people and all atheist Americans, but particularly atheist people of Florida. I don't know if there are any atheists in Florida. But we know about it, and I think we should have it reopened. Fellow unbelievers, or shall I say, you godless lot, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be among friends. And I would like to take advantage of this moment to express my own personal grief and sadness at the death of Christopher Hitchens, who was a dear friend and a man who lived for the mind. I miss him, and I know you'll miss him fondly. Then I'll get to the intense question of this afternoon about the protests in the Arab world of 2011. The first question to be asked is, what would a secular spring mean to the societies in North Africa, as opposed to an Islamist winter? For me, secularism means democracy and the rule of law, and thereby the relevant institutions. An end to corruption, and an end to human rights violations. Freedom of speech, so that government opposition can organize and compete for power with an incumbent office, and freedom of the press. Freedom of conscience, so that individuals can worship whatever they want and whoever they want, but they can also choose not to worship. Women's rights to veil or to unveil, to choose their own mates, to work outside the home, and keep their pay. And for me, a secular spring in the Arab world would mean the introduction of laws that would protect women from violence, not only in public, but particularly from violence at home. A secular spring for the Arab world would mean economic growth that would attract foreign investment and where tourism would thrive. It would also mean peace with Israel, at least an acknowledgement that the Jewish people have a right to their own state. A secular spring in the Arab world would have ushered in the end of Islamic terrorism. That would be a thing of the past. The Muslim youth, particularly the male among them, would develop a confidence in life before death as opposed to life after death. But for those of you who have been watching what's going on in North Africa and the Middle East, what you see is not a secular spring for the Arab people and for the Muslims who live in that part of the world, but an Islamist winter. Everywhere where elections have been held, in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Morocco, we've seen Islamist victories. In places like Yemen and Libya, where the old autocratic regimes have been toppled, we see informally that Islamists are in power or will soon be in power. In Saudi Arabia, the protests were silenced, not only through repression, which we never read about, but also through bribery. In Bahrain, a very small oil-rich country, we did see the protests, and they were silenced through repression, but the response to that repression, compared to the response to the repression committed by the likes of Mubarak, was very mild in the West. In Syria, I think the most resilient of the Arab protesters, it's ongoing. And the butcher in charge continues to massacre his own people. Ironically, however, it is very well possible that if Bashar al-Assad of Syria is toppled and the royal family of Bahrain are taken off power, that the Islamists will again win through fair elections. So what does an Islamist winter look like? What will it look like? There's a great deal of controversy over that among observers. A lot of them think that the Islamists, once in power, will become like the Christian Democrats of Europe. I don't think so. I think that the corruption that the Arabs protested against will be replaced by a religiously sanctioned one. We can see that because the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, in Egypt and other places, has infiltrated the opposition. They promised not to field a candidate for presidency, but they did. They promised, more importantly, that they would be tolerant toward non-Muslims and women. And at this point, they are not. In the only country where they actually are part of the government, they have started putting away authors and artists on ludicrous charges such as provoking society. What on earth is an author supposed to do, or an artist, if not to provoke society? It also means that human rights will be violated, but this time it's going to be backed by Allah and His Messenger. Forget about freedom of speech. That's going to be conditional to Islamic teachings. Forget about the freedom of the press. It will be allowed as long as it is convenient to push the autocrats out of office, and as long as it is necessary to placate the West. Forget about the freedom of conscience, because under an Islamist winter, the plight of Christians in Egypt, for instance, but in also other places, is going to be dire and is dire. They are killed, their churches are destroyed, the women are raped. But it's not only Christians. It's also the plight of Muslim dissidents and that of Muslim minority sects. Women. Geoffrey Robertson earlier talked about at length what the Catholic Church does to young children. At least the Catholic Church is subject to the rule of law. When the Islamists take over, they're going to lower the age of marriage to 9. The concept of guardianship, a fact that females will never be considered to be capable adults, is going to become official. Women who work within the strictures of the Islamist agenda will be touted as strong, powerful women. And Sharia law will be applied to justify violence in public and accommodate more plainly violence at home for those women who find living under Sharia unbearable.